Are you ready, kids?
Hello, it's Employee a Million, and welcome back to SpongeComs. Today's episode is Season 2, Episode 17, or Episode 37 overall, Procrastination and I'm with Stupid, both of which originally aired on Nickelodeon on October 19th, 2001. And these are episodes of Season 2 that I've been particularly excited for because they are pretty real in some cases. In the latter's case, a bit too real, but that should be fun to talk about and discuss and see if people have different reactions to it, because people certainly do. But the first episode up here is one that I'm sure a lot of people do love very much, Procrastination, which was written by Walt Dorn, Paul Tibbett, and Mr. Lawrence. This was his last writing credit until Season 7, which I think is kind of fascinating. He skipped Season 3, skipped 4, 5, 6, came back in 7 after not writing for it for a very long time, and that is a very bizarre thing to see. Because, of course, he was voicing Plankton and Larry and Realistic Talking Fishhead through that whole time, so why he stopped being part of the writing stuff, I don't really know. Could have been commitments with Camp Laszlo, or it could have been stuff about the actors, I don't know if there was any legal problems, but either way, he still is a fantastic writer, one of the show's very best, and I'm happy that he was able to incorporate his own style into this episode. This does have one of his characters, the Realistic Talking Fish Head, which I constantly forget the name of. I'm very sorry for that. The thing that really sticks out about Procrastination and why people still talk about it and love it and don't really assess it too critically is because it is a very relatable story to anyone of any age. Procrastination holds our nations back a ton. I myself am recording this the day before it's due to go up. I'll only have like a few hours to edit all this. So it is kind of fun to see SpongeBob go through this. It makes him feel more like us. I know you shouldn't put everything about you in a character that you're watching, but yeah, seeing SpongeBob go through a struggle like this does help him make him feel more dimensional and more like someone that you would know in real life. And that is pretty important for a cartoon character sometimes, and this episode did an amazing job at giving SpongeBob an obstacle to overcome that wasn't too cartoony. Of course, they go into a cartoony place with it anyway, but you know, SpongeBob, they're gonna do that anyway. Another very fascinating thing about this episode is that it was one of the first to be heavily censored in reruns starting in 2005, and I don't really know why. Like, there is a very long string of scenes that are a little off in certain ways, but that's no reason to cut nearly 2 minutes of nearly a whole minute of content from the episode and kind of impact the story progression in a negative way. Like, the first scene they cut is of SpongeBob looking outside and seeing Patrick give Sandy some sunscreen and her looking a little off-model and not really moving or anything. That's kind of odd. They could have just cut that little shot and kept the rest of the outside playtime bit. But then they follow it up with a bit of a race car, getting, like, into a bit of an accident. It's a live-action cutaway to it, and I can kind of understand why they cut that. But then you get to this little gymnastics bit where SpongeBob's raising his nose up and down, and you have to have a really dirty mind to have any sort of problem with that. So they just cut out nearly an entire minute of the show without any real thought or reason. And then after that, you get probably the most infamous little piece of animation from this episode. While he's dancing around in his chair, SpongeBob does a very cheeky laughing animation, which they then used for Up Next banners on Nickelodeon at some point in the early 2010s. And during an airing of an episode of The Legend of Korra, they had that little banner of him laughing at a very dark point in the episode, so that became a bit of a meme. And it's very fun when you're going back to these episodes and seeing these things that either impacted internet culture, impacted the show itself, impacted how we perceive Nickelodeon. And I don't know if that was like intentional. Let's just put this banner in a very odd place in that particular episode. I mean, personally, I don't get up next banners because you can just check the schedule anyway. It's just one click of a button. But what if you don't have a button? I don't know. I'm really happy with that bit of SpongeBob cleaning his kitchen to the extent that it becomes chrome. Everything certainly is chrome in the future, 2 years ahead of SB129 in specific. Something I do really like about the progression of the story in this episode is how it just keeps getting more mysterious, how all these people know about SpongeBob's essay writing and how he's immensely behind it. Because you have Gary, that's obvious. Then you have Patrick. He might have talked to Patrick about that earlier in the day. And then you have the mailman, and that could probably be a lucky guess. But that is where the mystery starts to get a little weird. And then you just have the realistic talking fish head, and the joke just completely writes itself. And it goes into a very cool nightmare sequence that's coming up soon. What's odd is that they then go back to the kitchen, and I don't think that they kept the chrome futuristic look of it. But I think about the essay in and of itself. I do think that the idea behind the essay and how it progresses, how writing such an essay is so hard, I think that's also kind of funny because, I mean, to a kid, writing 800 words is a nightmare. It's going to take like an entire week to do, depending on your reading and writing speeds. But to an adult, it isn't quite as hard. Like, I write a bunch of 1,000+ word scripts on the daily, so it isn't as big of a problem for me, but this is such an easy essay to write for an adult. Like, you can write a lot of things about what not to do at a stoplight. Sometimes it says spotlight in SpongeBob's essay, so you can tell he isn't even that good at spelling in this episode, so that's also a joke in and of itself. But again, you can write about things you shouldn't do at a stoplight for hours. You can write all sorts of things because there are serious rules on the road. And yeah, very broad. You don't really have a question like what you shouldn't have in the front seat or how should you take care of a passenger, which are questions that are asked in driving exams and whatnot. Here, it's about the easiest thing to really just overdo it with the words. It's such a broad thing, and that, I think, is kind of funny. Like, the thing with these old episodes is that they have all these little jokes that just pile onto each other and makes something so ridiculous that you just have to love it. This is one of my very favorite Season 2 episodes. It's just so funny when you analyze it and look into the jokes they tell. As is this little nightmare sequence where SpongeBob, his house catches on fire because he has difficulty writing an essay, and that's the problem. Plus, it's just really well designed and got a nice color theory and all that. Very cool, dark colors that just help make it stick out against the rest of the episode. And of course, the joke at the very end. This is all a Shaggy Dog story at the end of the day. SpongeBob didn't need to write it at all because they're going to see a stoplight as a field trip. And that must be one exciting field trip, let me just say. I also really like that little fire animation, very uncharacteristic for a SpongeBob character, but it works, it fits. Plus, this isn't real. And this is why phones were invented, so you just don't run around your house while your house is burning. Something that I was very surprised by is that this part of the episode right here, where SpongeBob is just recovering from his dream and realizing he still hasn't put that much effort into even the first little sentence. This is in the movie Ted, the Seth MacFarlane film about the talking teddy bear. And that is just such a surprise that, of course, you have seen SpongeBob on Family Guy once in a while, but then seeing him in another Seth MacFarlane production is also very surreal. Like, obviously, I haven't seen the scene myself because I never intend on seeing Ted, but yeah, it's really shows the reach of this character and his misadventures. Plus, this little scene at the end is really great of Mrs. Puff coming in. Although she has kind of a sinister look on her face when she's telling SpongeBob not to goof off at the start, this is a very nice portrayal of her. SpongeBob comes off as the kind of student who is very good at the written stuff, but not so much behind the wheel. Like, I think to an extent they throw that out later on, but yeah, he put in all this effort for nothing, and it made for an amazing episode. I'm With Stupid was written by Aaron Springer, C.H. Greenblatt, and Mark O'Hare, and is named after a very popular kind of t-shirt with just I'm With Stupid and then pointing to left or right, which they parody later on in the show, but enough about that. I really like how they just made Patrick's rock CGI for this intro. Like, saved a lot of grunt work with animating frame by frame. I don't know if it was complete CGI or just some sort of puppet rig that they used, but yeah, really sticks out, really looks good. And the thing with this episode is that it starts off very strong. I really do like this first scene with SpongeBob talking to Patrick about his problem, which he has at the moment. It's really funny, it's got some great SpongeBob non-sequiturs that are some of the most quotable moments of this side of the season. And it is a good opportunity of an episode to look at a character's family and see how SpongeBob learns more about his friend through that family. And in this case, it's Patrick's, sort of. And yeah, they are not the best parents at all. Just gonna get it right out of the way, these are not the best parents in the show. They aren't really some of the best characters either. They are pretty horrible, and they do not deserve to breathe oxygen. H2O probably, but not O on its own. But yeah, this has some really good jokes, like the callback to the funnel joke in Grandma's Kisses is pretty underrated. And that stuff about the note and then the letter, I put that on the thumbnail for a reason, it's a great pun. And other stuff that Patrick says, like math is power and don't genius leave it in a lamp. That is classic SpongeBob, and they have a good baseline, they have a good place to go with it. But this has ended up being one of the least loved episodes of Season 2. It's certainly my least favorite of the season, for a number of reasons that aren't, like, the obvious. Like, I won't really dignify the person who wasn't the first, but kind of popularized disliking this episode, but the main criticism with this episode is that Patrick is very out of character here. He very quickly forgets that he is even friends with SpongeBob just so that jokes can happen, and not even very good jokes. I'd struggle to call this an outright bad episode because again, it's got those really good jokes, and there are some great little observational bits here and there during this portion of the episode. But something that kind of drags it down for me, and this has kind of popped up over the years, it wasn't really something I thought about as a kid or as a teenager when I reviewed this for the first time, is that it's a bit insensitive for a SpongeBob episode. I mean, they do this bit, well, later on they do a pretty bizarre bit that just kind of pushes everyone over the line, but one of the little, like, hidden gags in this episode is that SpongeBob is wearing his karate helmet for a lot of it. And you can kind of see this as a cap that is handy, and that is a pun, and that is a very generous way of putting it, but it's also maybe not the best kind of pun for this kind of show, because it could impact a way a kid sees these kinds of people into their adult years as less human. Sorry for getting a little social commentary there, but yeah, this is a very interesting case study into how we saw more socially, at least, or intellectually challenged people in comedy in the early 2000s. This is one of the few times that SpongeBob really tried to be on that wavelength that adult comedies would go for. Like, obviously, it can go for pretty adult themes at points, like homelessness, but you really didn't really get insult humor directed at certain people like this before. And to their credit, they're not trying to dehumanize these people with caps that are handy. However, it is pretty mean in hindsight that they're doing this sort of comedy on SpongeBob on a kids show that kids will watch, and it will impact how they see these people. However, it does, to its credit, it does kind of show that mocking them makes you look like an even bigger idiot. I think that's the overall message of the episode, and it kind of flies over most people because you're just still feeling bad for SpongeBob and how he's being treated. Another little underrated bit is all the sound effects they bring out. Another callback to The Secret Box, when they used sound effects like willy-nilly. This is also the first time that Patrick has a real rock house and not just a rock bedroom. Like, there's a living room, and then there's different rooms like a kitchen. And it is really interesting to see how Patrick's rock has evolved in just 2 seasons. And like, even some of these less flattering gags on Patrick's behalf, they do have some substance behind them. Like, they are really showing that Patrick and his supposed parents are the real dummies. And again, these parents aren't quite as bad as the numerous patriarchal figures on Ren and Stimpy, but it's also in that same tier of can't parents be awful sometimes that Nickelodeon would sometimes do and sometimes be a little more sensitive about. This is one of their less sensitive attempts at it. I think in another defense of this episode, an episode that I don't even really like that much, SpongeBob does have the ability to leave at any time. He's not stuck in this situation. He's just doing it for his friend, and when his friend turns on him, he does try to do a nice thing, and then that completely backfires, and then he leaves. So there is a very nice story progression. There is a very obvious set of events. This is a very fine episode in terms of SpongeBob and his part to play in the story. Patrick, not so much, but yeah, and Squidward especially not so much, but you can kind of You can kind of get it at the very end. Obviously, he never apologizes to SpongeBob. This is no Doug. This is no Hey Arnold. This is a very cynical ending that usually only the cartooniest of cartoons really go for, to hammer home their gags or some kind of really cynical point, which you don't really often see on SpongeBob, especially this early on. But yeah, it is in this episode, it is what it is. They thought that this was the funniest, or at least more meaningful direction to go in, so it stayed in the episode ever since, 20 years later. However, I could be misremembering, but I did remember the period between SpongeBob reintroducing himself and halfway through the laughter montage being cut on an airing or two, so it jumped straight to that. Don't know if that was another cut they accidentally made alongside Procrastination, or if my mind's just playing tricks on me. It is normal size and fully functional, guys. But yeah, this is definitely them going incredibly overboard and not acting very kind to SpongeBob and his more sensitive needs. And of course, a lot of this ugly laughing is really dang ugly, and yeah, the sequence is well storyboarded and all that. It is surreal enough. But wasn't Procrastination already surreal enough? I mean, I know that they don't really pick which episodes go together. I don't know exactly who picks that. But yeah, it's kind of strange that they both have these very bizarre sequences showing SpongeBob's inner turmoil. That's another thing they have in common, aside from being agonizingly relatable for some people. And I think one of the reasons why I can kind of forgive the ending to this episode, because even though Janet and Marty are incredibly creepy in the end, Patrick has to go through all this teasing from his parents again, and he doesn't have SpongeBob to back him out. He's lost his friend in this scenario, and that is biting him now. And I think that is a fine place to leave it, because obviously this won't go as well for him as it will last time. And he has to learn to be the dummy, so to speak, again. So, definitely a very contested episode, but yeah, there is definitely some benefit of the doubt to give. And again, even with an episode like this, it is worth analyzing how they did it and what the story beats were, and if it can still be enjoyable in that context. So that is Procrastination, and I'm with Stupid. Last time on Krusty Love, my question of the week was, what is your favorite pairing? Rebel Friend and Super Seal answered Spandy, or SpongeBob and Sandy. Jack McGinn doesn't like shipping. That is totally fine. My question of the week this week is, who are your favorite family members? Because coming off of I'm with Stupid, I just need some good family vibes from this show. And Mr. Krabs and Pearl are acceptable, but kind of a cheat. I'm talking about family members that you don't often see on the show or were one-offs. Like, I think my favorites is a three-way or five-way tie between the family members you see in Stanley S. SquarePants, between Sandy's Scottish cousin, Squidward's angsty teen relative, and the Huey, Dewey, and Louie nephews that Mr. Krabs has. I think those are all really good gags, and they really elevate the episode for me. Speaking of which, next week, I'm doing this weekly now until the end of Season 2, we've got a very expressionist pair of episodes, expressing profane thoughts in sailor mouth, and expressing yourself through your Squidward schnozzed art in Artist Unknown. Goodbye for now.